The Red Lobster has officially filed for bankruptcy, and the entire mainstream media is lying to you about the real reason for their downfall. But before I get into all of that, I'm going to eat this because this is going to be the last meal I ever have from them. I have a master's degree in business, and today I'm going to use it to analyze how the largest seafood chain in the entire world seemingly crumbled overnight. But in order to understand exactly how this happened, we're going to have to go back to the very beginning because it actually goes back a lot further in time than you probably even realize. So in 1968, somebody named Bill Darden in Florida started the first Red Lobster in the entire world. But what a lot of people don't know about Bill is this actually wasn't the first restaurant he ever started. The first restaurant he ever started was called the Green Frog, and it was in 1938 in Georgia. And he was actually considered a very controversial figure at the time because he was one of the first people in the South who owned a restaurant chain to advocate against segregation in restaurants. So he was a very fierce advocate for serving Black and white people in the restaurant, as well as keeping them in the same rooms, which was obviously extremely unpopular at the time. And I just kind of wanted to include that as a fun fact because it shows that Bill originally started his venture into the restaurant industry with the best of intentions. So Bill actually was a huge trailblazer in the restaurant industry because before this, fine dining was something that was sort of exclusively reserved for the wealthiest people in America. And he wanted to provide a fine dining experience for the average working class family who may not be able to afford extremely expensive restaurants, but wanted to give them an opportunity to enjoy something that was typically obviously a lot more expensive, like seafood, in a restaurant experience that was a little bit more casual dining, but still allowed them to sort of celebrate as families and enjoy that dining experience that was a little bit elevated past fast food, which really was a completely new thing at the time. Like, these types of restaurants did not exist. Before this, there was really just fine dining and that's it. So this was really the first time that a whole casual dining experience, the entire idea of a restaurant franchise, think the Keg, think Olive Garden, which actually later was acquired by him. This really was a huge moment in history for the restaurant industry. Now we fast forward to the 90s. Bill Darden expands his business. There are now hundreds of Red Lobster locations all over the United States and Canada. And Darden Restaurant Enterprise expanded into coffee shops, expanded into something called the Olive Garden, which of course we all know still exists today. And then in 1994, Bill unfortunately passed away. And this will sort of be the moment in time where things start to change for the Red Lobster. So Bill is dead, and this is something that we've seen many times in history, which is when a visionary founder of a brand dies, oftentimes the vision and the original intention and soul that they had behind the business dies with them. And we've seen examples of this happen in witnessing the decline of Disney after Walt Disney passed away. Going from a company that was just making movies and stories for children into a money-greedy corporate entity that it is now. We saw the exact same thing happen after Steve Jobs passed away, and the exact same thing happen after Bill passed away, because the reason and the soul that he put in this company was that he wanted to create a fine dining experience for the working class and offer them affordable prices. And this original intention that he had really did die the day that he passed away. And one of the reasons for that is at this point in 1994, the entire restaurant chain was already publicly operated. There were a board of directors and obviously public shareholders. People were purchasing shares in the stock market. And when you become a public entity, there really is only one goal. That entity exists to maximize profits for shareholders. But it's kind of an ironic situation that happens, which is when you go into that and you start making decisions exclusively to make more money, you actually just end up upsetting your customers and they stop returning, which then resulted in a huge turning event that happened in 2014. So the genius executives that took over the company after Bill passed away made some very serious strategic mistakes that we see time and time again. They tried to maximize short-term profits at the cost of long-term gain. So they were cutting costs, they were raising prices for their customers, they were leasing their buildings, they were lowering the quality of the food in terms of where the seafood was being sourced from. They were doing all of these things that on paper, yes, may increase profits in the short term, but they're forgetting at the very bottom of that paper and who is supporting the business are actual human beings who are going into the restaurants. And if you're pissing them off because they are short-staffed, because the buildings aren't clean enough, and because the food sucks, they're going to slowly stop returning. And then if you have no returning customers, your business obviously starts to die. So these genius MBA executives who ran the Red Lobster made so many idiotic decisions and lowered the quality and the name recognition of the Red Lobster to such a degree that they were forced to sell it to a private equity firm called Golden Gate Capital in 2014 for $2.1 billion. But there was actually a stipulation on the sale. And the stipulation from the private equity firm stated that they had to sell all of the properties that the Red Lobsters existed on. So there was a huge pool of real estate of properties that they had purchased since the 1960s when it was originally formed, and they were going to do a sale leaseback. So what this means is basically every single restaurant that the Red Lobster existed on, they sold that, and they made about $1.5 billion, so they almost recuperated their original investment. So in a way, they didn't even really invest the money because they initially made it back as per was a stipulation of that sale. But then what happened was that the people that were running the Red Lobsters, the franchisees, had to now have an overhead cost, and they became tenants on their own property. So they went from having almost no overhead expenses that weren't directly tied to the actual customers in terms of having staff and cleaning and the food itself, to now having to pay exorbitant amounts of rent every single month despite raising inflation costs, which then caused stores to shut down all over the country extremely quickly. So stick with me, because this is where it gets very shady and borderline illegal. So because of that idiotic decision to sell all of the Red Lobster real estate and then force the restaurant owners to pay exorbitant amounts of rent to a third party, almost half of the restaurants closed down. And then in 2020, the private equity firm that acquired Red Lobster completely gave up, and they said, I don't want to do this anymore. And they decided to sell the company to another entity called Thai Union Group, which was actually a seafood supplier and the main seafood supplier for the Red Lobster. So this was very bizarre for me to learn, because that's a very clear conflict of interest to sell the company to a person who is supplying your raw ingredients. So now you own the entire supply chain. I'm not sure how that's not in breach of some monopoly laws. And then something very strange happens. So Thai Union Group appoints a CEO who comes in and says, I have a genius idea. He created this debacle of free shrimp. So he decided that he wanted to force this policy across every single restaurant in North America for the Red Lobster, that they would have all-you-can-eat shrimp. And apparently, when you give Americans an all-you-can-eat option, they say challenge accepted. And this ended up resulting in the Red Lobster losing $11 million per quarter, so that's $44 million a year, because Americans were just eating so much shrimp for $20. So they were actually losing a crazy amount of money. But the reason why this was so weird is that Thai Union Group owns the shrimp supply chain, right? So Thai Union Group is now selling the shrimp to Red Lobster, even though they're basically the same company, but they are selling them shrimp for a markup. So Thai Union Group is making millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in marking up the price of the seafood, but now Red Lobster can no longer provide adequate prices to their customers. The customers get even more mad. And what's even more weird is that they were already doing this whole all-you-can-eat shrimp thing before, and they knew that it was a loss-leading strategy. So this is something where companies will purposely do something that they know is going to lose money in the short term, in terms for a broader goal like increasing foot traffic and creating customer loyalty. But this was just so crazy that they implemented it all year round, 24/7, all-you-can-eat shrimp, that the only logical explanation is that the CEO of Thai Union Group was lining his pockets with the money he was selling, because Red Lobster was forced to buy all the shrimp from them, because he was the only person supplying it. He basically monopolized the shrimp. So now this crazy CEO who has made millions of dollars from the all-you-can-eat shrimp scam needs a scapegoat, because all the restaurants are closing down left and right because of all of this mismanagement finally catching up to them, and he needed a scapegoat. So he blamed the Americans, saying that they were very fat and that they were eating way too much shrimp, and they are the sole reason that the company is going bankrupt. And the media ran with this story, but now that they filed for bankruptcy, we can see all of their financials in detail, and we can see that the all-you-can-eat shrimp was nothing. The real reason was that they sold $1 billion worth of their assets, and the $11 million that they lost from the shrimp pales in comparison to the $1.5 billion that they lost from doing the sale leaseback. And now Red Lobster is no more because of greed and mismanagement.